And now we reach number 43, Rollerball, from 2002, a remake of the 1975 movie of the same name, which I knew very little about, and what I did know was solely because of this movie coming up here. But either way, both of them are on Tubi, because where else would they be? Okay, first off, the original. It was written by William Harrison, based on his own short story Rollerball Murder, which was published in Esquire magazine in 1973. To direct, they got Canadian director Norman Jewison, director of Jesus Christ Superstar, Moonstruck, Fiddler on the Roof, and The Thomas Crown Affair. They also got James Caan to star. It takes place in the far-off distant future of 2018, where society pretty much revolves around a violent sport called, you guessed it, rollerball. So to create the sport, all the games were shot at Rudi Sedlmayr Hall in Munich because it was the only arena in the world with a near circular field, which apparently helped make it look different for each different stadium. The sport they created was so well realized that stuntmen would play it in between takes, presumably in a less violent way. And to keep this feature from looking too 70s, extras were paid extra to cut their hair, since long hair was a fashion of that decade. They also played a lot of classical music. Part of this was inspired by A Clockwork Orange, but it was also for the same reasons as the haircuts. Playing 70s music would tie it to the 70s. However, the IMDB trivia entry that claims this also points out how many of the sets and other stuff still look very 1970s. This movie is also notable because it was one of the first movies to ever put its stunt performers' names in the credits. Also, while on the subject of stuntmen, one of them was English pro wrestler Mark Rocco, who would later nickname himself Rollerball. Now on to the review. But first, it's about a dystopian future where everything revolves around the sport rollerball. Basically, all war is gone and all conflicts are resolved through the sport. Or everybody gets out all their aggression through it or something. Whatever, the point is war is gone and the game rules everything. And James Caan plays Jonathan E., the biggest star in the game, except people much higher than him want him to retire. Or gone any other way, even if it means cutting back on some regulations on his games in the hopes that he gets killed out there. But all I really heard about it before watching was that it was about a violent game in the future, it was rated R, and it has a cult following. So I was expecting it to be like Death Race 2000 or something more grindhousey, but it isn't. The game isn't even as violent as I was expecting. Yes, it's technically violent and all, but more in the sense of unsportsmanlike contact and not a you lose, you die situation. But also, this isn't really as much fun as you'd expect. This is from a major studio who wanted to make art. Lame. There are really only a handful of scattered rollerball scenes, and the vast majority of this over 2-hour movie is Jonathan's life outside the ring and investigating what the organization has against him. Apparently the filmmakers weren't even filming it to be R-rated. They were hoping for a PG rating, but the ratings board said no. It's a very low R. And all that would be great, except the problem is it's just not as interesting as it wants to be. The plot moves at a very slow pace and the characters aren't really interesting enough to make this slow burn work. The high parts are unsurprisingly the rollerball games. They are brutal and full of action. They kind of remind me a little of Mad Max, but on a smaller scale. Although they're not as spectacular or anything. There's only so much you can do with people skating in a circle. But they are fun, especially after sitting through the rest of the movie. It's best near the end of the climax when there are less people on the field and it has more drama and power to it. But unfortunately, they aren't fun enough to really make up for the rest of this movie. And I don't really have much else to say about it. I don't know if this is going to be controversial, but then again, a lot of what I've seen implies that most of the conversation around it admits that it's at least flawed. According to Film Inc., it might have actually inspired the movies I was expecting this to be. The more interesting ones. Their words, not mine. They said it could have stood to be a little less important and a little trashier. And I honestly don't think I could have said it better myself. And I will definitely not regret that statement before the end of this video. This movie is a little more highbrow than I expected, but also a lot less interesting. Basically, just think of something like Brazil, except boring, and occasionally they'd throw in some cool action scenes to distract from that. What a disappointment. So anyway, it opened to mixed to positive reviews and made $30 million on a $5 to $6 million budget. And it obviously gained enough of a following to justify a remake. Although IMDB claims that at least part of that following was from a drinking game where a team would drink whenever the word Jonathan is said, and another when the word corporation is said. And no player on Team Jonathan has made it past 10 minutes when there's a scene where the name is said over 100 times. Yeah, that sounds a little extreme. I don't know if this is true or not. James Caan would later say that he'd rate this movie an 8 out of 10, saying that he couldn't do much with his character. And after the release, people liked the action sequences so much that director Norman Jewison was contacted multiple times with offers to sell the rights to the game so that they can form an actual rollerball league. offers that pissed Jewison off, saying that this was invented as a critique of contact sports, and this feature was not supposed to be something to aspire to. So of course he's not going to do that. What is he, Netflix? It is also credited with inspiring the Commodore game Racquetball. People also think it may have inspired the game Speedball, but the developer denies that. Meanwhile, She Who Must Not Be Named lists it as one of her favorite movies, and many say that it may have influenced the rules of Quidditch. Also, there's one random IMDB trivia that I feel like I can't ignore. Allegedly, there was supposed to be a porn parody called Rollerballs, but it was cancelled because the game scenes were shot with assless chaps, which made so many actors' butts sore that they couldn't film the sex scenes. Okay. Anyway, there was also supposed to be a video game sequel in 1998, but it was cancelled after the developer MGM Interactive went bankrupt. But in 2004, they made a cell phone game. For flip phones, I guess. The Wikipedia page specifies that this was based on the original and not the then recent remake. And that is the only mention of said remake on the entire page for the original. Normally there's like a paragraph long section that basically just says that it exists. Not here, I guess it's just too embarrassing. Rollerball is the perfect candidate for a remake. A movie that is sort of beloved, yet there is still room for improvement. What could possibly go wrong?
Arnold Schwarzenegger is the Running Man. He's playing for a prize. The prize is his life.
How about the life?
The Running Man.
So, after the video game sequel fell through, MGM decided to remake the movie instead. The script was written by Larry Ferguson and John Pogue, and that script actually got a lot of acclaim, even considered by many to be better than the original. And to direct, they were able to get John McTiernan. That's the director of, some small, forgotten indies like Die Hard, Predator, The Hunt for Red October. He also coincidentally directed the remake of another Norman Jewison movie, The Thomas Crown Affair. And so, of course, with such an amazing script and the director of some of the best action movies ever, they made something that improved on the flaws of the original and became the defining adaptation of the story. The end. Okay, so why didn't that happen? Well, it all started with Josh McTiernan. He just decided he wasn't a fan of the script. He didn't like how it focused on social commentary. The whole point of the damn movie. And thought that the audience would want to see more of the rollerball scenes instead. I was more upset that the non-action scenes weren't interesting, not that they existed at all. You don't have to... But he did. He ordered for it to be rewritten many times. He wanted to make sure that it focused more on what the Wikipedia page describes as WWE-like showmanship, including stunts and crazy costumes. He also changed the lead's role from a successful athlete to more of an underdog and changed his name from Jonathan E. to Jonathan Cross for some reason. He clashed a lot with the film's producer, John Robin, over his vision for the script. Remember this because it will eventually lead to the event that I probably put in the title of this video. He also had a more unknown rising star actor in mind for the lead role, American Pie's Chris Klein. LL Cool J also played a supporting role. According to IMDb, X-Men actress Rebecca Romijn agreed to play the love interest only if they removed a nude scene from the script and gave her a deep facial scar. Which I find particularly bizarre because it looks like in the original cut she had another nude scene that wasn't cut out. More on that later. The new script was filmed in 2000. Many of the rollerball players were recycled between games, and apparently, according to IMDb, that led to them improving their performance in games that were filmed later. Anyway, filming was all wrapped up with a runtime of over 2 hours, and the film was set for release in the summer of 2001. Until a couple months before that date when they held a test screening for it in Las Vegas. And it went badly. Like, really badly. And so they pushed the release date back so that they can test it again and hopefully find its audience. And even invited Harry Knowles, a reporter from the website Ain't It Cool News, to that screening in the hopes that he'd bring some positive buzz. It didn't work. He said he appreciated it for at least having a hard R rating, but otherwise called it one of the worst movies he'd ever seen, and claimed that there were people jeering in the theater. He also said that he read and really enjoyed the original script that McTiernan butchered. Okay, apparently the dude's not a good guy, but he's still a big part of what happened with this movie, so don't get mad at me. Anyway, at around the same time, MGM got a new head of marketing who convinced everybody to move this away from being a summer release to February 2002 so that they can create a new marketing campaign and so that McTiernan can do some serious reshoots. And I mean serious reshoots, including cutting out a full half hour of material and filming a different ending. And also, sorry Mr. Knowles, to trim it down to a PG-13 rating. This was both because they wanted a wider audience and because at the time studios were under fire for marketing R-rated films to teenagers, and the backlash only got worse after 9/11. They also requested that certain scenes be cut out because they felt too Asian? Many action scenes were recut or shortened, including the opening scene of Johnny doing street luge through the streets of San Francisco, which many at the test screenings complained was confusing due to the editing. Also, the score was replaced because it felt too... Okay, what the hell was going on at MGM in 2001? Okay, I just realized that while saying it. Or at least part of the answer. But even then, the marketing had another big issue. It was marketed as being from the makers of The Fast and the Furious, but the only connection to that movie was that Rollerball co-writer John Pogue served as an executive producer on it. And that led to Universal Pictures, the studio behind The Fast and the Furious, filing a lawsuit because they feared that being associated with this dumpster fire would hurt their reputation and plans to make sequels. This led to that statement being removed from all ads and, of course, endless Fast and Furious sequels. But anyway, what was left after all the cuts was this. It takes place in the far-off distant future of 2005 where basically everything looks exactly the same because it's only 3 fucking years later. Except Rollerball is now popular in a bunch of Eastern European countries. And American Johnny Cross gets invited by LL Cool J's character to join the league in Kazakhstan with him. But then he learns about how corrupt the organizers are and now they want him dead. And so we have a movie. Hey, remember how the original used classical music to avoid being limited to one decade but still ended up missing details that made it look explicitly 70s? Well, this version does not have to worry about that. Just check out the music choices for each of these trailers. That's right, they didn't even try, so therefore they can't fail. Look at this soundtrack. Is this not the most 2002 selection of songs you've ever seen? This movie is all 2000s aesthetics. It opens with the hero street luging through the streets of San Francisco, and then after that turns into a whirlwind of extreme sports and nu metal. It's everything a 2000s teen who can't get into an R-rated movie could possibly want. Except, of course, for a good movie. Here are some cameos that further emphasize the vibe that they're going for here. It features an appearance from pro wrestler Shane McMahon, and the pop star Pink briefly appears lip-syncing to a Rob Zombie song. Because when I think of Pink, the artist that really comes to mind is Rob Zombie. And an appearance from the band Slipknot, except according to IMDB they didn't actually appear on set, the filmmakers just cut in footage of one of their performances into the movie. If there's one positive thing you can say about this movie that can't be said about the original, it's that it's never boring. Well, that, and it's only 98 minutes long. But the point is, McTiernan delivered on his stupid ideas of how to fix the allegedly amazing script. This is fast-paced, action-packed, and even when there isn't action, it's still pumping wannabe-cool early 2000s aesthetics into your face. In a way, it's kind of the opposite of what was wrong with the original. That one was too slow-paced and didn't have enough action. This one needs to slow down, and try to say something. It made me appreciate the social commentary of the original a little more. That one mistakenly thought that commentary would be a good substitute for pacing, and that sucks. But now I see what happens when you don't have any of that commentary at all. What kind of drugs did McTiernan have to be on to turn a sci-fi movie about a dystopian future into a present-day action movie mainly about how cool the characters are? And of course, the action scenes aren't as great either, as you may have expected from the fact that they had to be re-edited just so people could understand what the hell was going on. And I think I could understand what was going on most of the time, but it just wasn't as exciting as the original. And maybe a lot of that may have come from the choppy editing. It was poorly cut before, and the fact that they needed to cover up some R-rated violence probably didn't make fixing it much easier. Although, once again, there's only so much you can do with people skating in a circle. Even when they do try to make it extreme with all these extreme designs and nu metal and pyrotechnics that go off whenever someone scores a goal. Cool, now make the games good. I also find it kind of ironic how the sport was apparently so well realized in the original, yet in this version, after the announcer explains the game, he says, and the rest of the rules are really complicated and in Russian. Outside the ring, there is a chase scene that's shot entirely in night vision, and it looks stupid. I guess night vision could maybe work in an action scene in a better movie if the shots were a little more restrained. Like if this was made up of shots of the drivers and shots of one car through a camera hooked up to the other car. But a lot of this is just tracking shots of the cars going, and it doesn't even look like night vision anymore. It just looks like, why the hell is everything green? It also has two of the most questionable sound effects I've ever heard in a movie like this. And now about the PG-13 rating. It doesn't feel too toned down in terms of violence. It's not particularly bloody, but I don't remember any scene that particularly felt like it needed to be bloody. Surprisingly, there are even a couple short topless scenes that didn't get cut. Yep, this PG-13 movie has boobs in it. Wait, actually, while making this video, I found out that the version they have on Tubi might actually be the unrated version. No, that's still not the 2-hour version that was screened for test audiences. Allegedly, the only noticeable difference is that in the theatrical version, they've CGI'd shirts onto those girls. But despite the unratedness, they still have a noticeably PG-13 version of the love interest's nude scene, which is where I most noticed that the movie was toned down. She's lifting weights topless for some reason, and you see her back. Still not too bad yet, but then she walks towards Johnny to seduce him, and there's a conveniently placed shadow covering her body from the neck down, put in post-production. Like, I understand cutting out the R-rated scenes that the test audience hated, but what's the point in using the exact same footage but censored? Now about some of McTiernan's other changes to the script. Apparently the decision to set it in the present day was also from him. That was stupid, obviously. The decision to make Johnny start off as an underdog probably sounded great on paper, but here it makes the whole thing seem very rushed. I mean, he starts out as a newbie, but then maybe before like the second act or so, suddenly he's top stuff, and just before the climax, the announcer calls him the greatest person who's ever played the sport. And I never once got the feeling that he had reached that level over the course of these short 90 minutes. Maybe the 2-hour cut would have fixed that? Probably not. Also, Chris Klein gets a lot of flack for being a bland hero in this. Personally, I wouldn't place him as among the top 50 things wrong with this movie. His performance is a little wooden, but then again, look at what he has to work with. But he does still come across as a sort of bland hero here. Although there are some glimmers of the better script here near the end. The end of the original felt like a guy sticking it to the man in front of millions of viewers. This one feels like an all-out revolution, so I guess it has that. But either way, it released 2 appropriate reviews. The only positive review on Metacritic proclaimed that it should alienate no fans of the original, but I'm pretty sure it did. Also, one of the 0-star ratings said that the only good thing it has is that its name could help the porn industry by giving them an easy title to spoof. I wouldn't be so sure of that either. It was also a huge box office bomb, making $25.9 million off of a budget of $70 million. The original author, William Harrison, has said that he has never seen this version of the story and has no interest in it. Well, on the bright side, at least nobody wanted to see a real-life version of the sport, considering they didn't even want to see a fake one. But things weren't over yet for McTiernan. Ah yes, the moment you've all been waiting for. In 2006, a private detective by the name of Anthony Pellicano was arrested as he served as a fixer for many people in Hollywood. And one of the people he offered his services to was McTiernan. The FBI discovered that during the development phase for this movie, he was hired to illegally wiretap aforementioned producer Charles Roven because McTiernan was afraid that he was trying to mess with his vision. He was also charged with lying to the FBI about his relationship with Pellicano. The judge overseeing his trial described him as being unrepentant for his actions and giving off the impression that he was above the law. So I guess I can't feel too bad for hating on his terrible movie. I guess that behavior shouldn't be surprising for a guy who thought he was being sabotaged just because the other guy said his movie should have the essence of the original. Anyway, spoiler alert, he wasn't above the law, and he was sentenced to 4 months in federal prison. It's poetic in a way how he went to jail as a direct result of his attempts to ruin what was widely considered to be a great script. Yes, the studio ruined it too, but he did it first. I really hate to be that guy, but maybe the test screenings wouldn't have gone so badly if he didn't think so low of the audience. I guess it's more entertaining than the original, possibly even more memorable for me, mostly as a bad movie and a product of its time, and it clings to the feel of that time so hard that it could be a guilty pleasure if the action was just a little better. It's a little like Catwoman, except not as enjoyable. But mostly, this is just a cynical treatment of a movie with an actual message. It's as if it exists solely to make me feel bad for having those specific complaints about the original. Ruined even further by studio meddling. The original cut was probably still better than this. They should have wiretapped MGM. It really needed to be more Asian. I mean, look at how that worked out for Crazy Rich Asians. Either way, this could have been a fun time capsule if the very idea behind it wasn't the worst thing ever. Yeah, let's put it at 8 between Steel and Fear.com. Anyway, like, share, and subscribe and all that.